Hi guys, welcome to Point Blank's Friday Forum Live. I'm Carly and we are streaming live from our headquarters here in East London. Point Blank is a global electronic music school with courses in London, LA and online. Just head to pointblankmusicschool.com where you can check out a whole range of our courses, including DJing, music production, mixing and sound engineering. Today we are joined by Point Blank instructor extraordinaire, Paul Russell, and we are going to be taking a look at Arturia's Modular V, which is a software recreation of the very famous Moog modular. And remember, we are streaming live, so please get your questions in the comments section for Paul, and we'll get to them a little later on. Hi Paul, how are you going?
Hi Carly, I'm well. How are
Happy
you?
Friday.
Happy Friday, yeah.
Cool. So, I mean, for those people that are kind of new to the world of modular, which, like me, really, I mean, is it kind of as daunting as it looks? Because you know, some of these things they're massive and they look like spaceships.
They are massive.
I mean, what's the reality? Is it as scary as it looks?
The reality is that I think with a good grounding in modular synthesis and how it works, so understanding just general modulation, what the different modules do, what oscillators and filters are, envelopes, all that kind of stuff, you'll have a much better advantage when it comes to using modular synthesis. But the beauty of these things is that you can just play with them as well and discover all the stuff on your own as well.
Okay.
And that's almost kind of a more exciting way to do it.
Yeah.
Like, and what Arturia have done with the Modular V is they've made it very user-friendly as well. So, you know, we'll dive into it and sort of take it apart, and we'll build a very simple, we'll start with a very simple patch, and we'll kind of take the modulation a bit further.
Cool. So even people without experience in modular synthesis will be able to kind of take this and make a basic patch?
And hopefully get started, yeah.
Okay,
and
cool.
get addicted, like I did.
What are a few kind of creative benefits of modular versus just your regular analog synth?
Well, it depends on the modular, because you get some quite sort of simple modular synthesizers as well. So it really just depends on the number of modules you have. So with the Moog Modular V, for example, we've got 9 oscillators. There's numerous envelopes, filters, all sorts of interesting little modules like sample and hold, and the Bode frequency shifter, which we'll have a little look at later.
Okay.
So the more modules you have, the more complex your design can be. I think if someone's just looking for a simple sine wave sub-bass sound, then modular is a bit like, you know, sort of, it's like using a jackhammer to open a peanut or something. It's just there's so much you can do with a modular synthesizer in terms of complexity. And the real benefit for me is that you can have sounds that evolve over time.
Right.
So you can kind of create these things that modulate each other in interesting ways, and you literally just press a note and, you know, something kind of like happens just over time and sort of evolves.
Just kind of has a life of its own.
Yeah. So this was a sequence I put together, which is just a very basic sort of percussion sequence, which we're going to have a look at building afterwards. So it's just basically using the built-in sequencer, which we're going to spend a bit of time on today.
Yeah.
And then obviously using a little bit of sort of control as well to kind of, you know, open things like filters, change things like release time. I made this morning. I was in a bit of a mood this morning, apparently. So you can kind of hear, this is just a sequence that kind of like evolves on its own. There's a whole bunch of different things I've put in there. There's a little bit of randomness, so I'll show people how to kind of like add a little bit of random modulation into what they're doing as well.
Cool.
So yeah, so I think the best place to start is to start with a blank patch.
Yeah.
And then we'll take a quick overview of the Moog modular and how it's put together, what all the modules do. So as you can see, this thing is a beast.
It is.
This is version 3 of Arturia's Moog modular, and one of the biggest updates with this was sort of a visual update, just in terms of actually using a photorealistic image of the original. So this is based on a whole range of different modules from the Moog modular, sort of between the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
And it's all kind of combined into one big package. So, first prize would be to kind of have this in real life, but you'd be looking at something that, is about that high, maybe that wide.
A beast.
It's a beast.
And how much would an original cost, do you reckon?
That really depends on the module. Moog, for example, have recently done a reissue of the Series 55.
Okay.
And this contains modules from the Series 55. And I think that starts at about $36,000.
Casual?
Yeah, casual.
Cool.
Casual amounts.
So it's either that or a house.
I mean, you could put a tarp on it and live under it. That would be a tough decision for me because I would honestly love to.
So the plug-in is probably a much more realistic option.
It is, and what Arturia have done is they've in a lot of ways they've increased the functionality as well because they've added things that you can't really do with the actual thing as well. So we'll have a look at that. So let's start from the very beginning. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to load a blank template.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to give us just the synth as you would find it before anything's been patched or plugged in. So if we go back now.
So this is our blank canvas.
This is our blank canvas.
Right.
It's quite and I understand why it's quite daunting because first of all, where do you start, right? So let's start in the middle, and we'll kind of like work through the sections as we sort of add them together. So this is the oscillator section here. And basically consists of 9 oscillators, each divided into sort of 3 driver sections. So 9 oscillators, and you have the ability to kind of use individual waveforms from each one. So you can get 4 waveforms out of each of those. So when you start doing the math, you realize you have a massive amount of oscillators to use.
Yeah.
So next to it, there's a little LFO here, which we'll come back to a bit later. And then at the bottom, this is quite an important area. This is your mixing area. So what this allows you to do is grab signals from different parts and then basically mix them together.
Okay.
So right off the bat, to get a very basic sound, we need to connect our waveform that we want to start with. So I'll go to oscillator 1 here, and I'll grab the square wave or the pulse wave, and I'm going to just attach that to the VCA over here. So on the right-hand side, you have 2 voltage-controlled amplifiers, and these basically allow you to get sound. So without that connection, obviously, you're not going to get any sound to start with. We drag that, connect it to the VCA, and we immediately have sound. Cool. And it's literally that simple. So to get just a basic waveform, if you wanted just like a sine wave or something like that, literally it's one connection, and you're there. Anyone who's familiar with synthesis will recognize the envelope controls. So you've got attack, decay, sustain, release. So this allows you to kind of shape the sound as it exists over time. So kind of have like a slow attack.
Okay.
So let's bring that back down there. Okay, so that's kind of like a very, very basic start. Now the problem with this is once the oscillator's gone to the VCA is basically one of the last lines of the chain in a sense. So what that means is, we can't do any real modulation after that.
Okay.
So the best way to kind of connect this is to bring in one of our filters. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that same square wave.
Yeah.
I'm going to connect it into our mixer here, and then I'm going to grab the output from the mixer and connect it to the input up here, which is the first filter. So that's just a straight up low pass filter. Wow. So what this is going to allow us to do is basically start shaping the tone. So now I'll take that output and drag it to the VCA. So this is now giving us that same tone, but now filtered. And of course, you can control the frequency cutoff. And you can hear how that filter adds so much character to the sound. This is something that Moog was known for, was the sort of quality of their filters. And a lot of that has to, sort of contributed to the Moog sound. Okay. So you can hear it's added quite just like this really nice kind of beefiness to the tone as well. Okay, so you'll see that you basically have all these different connection points, right? So for this particular filter, and you'll see this on a lot of the filter section up here, is that you have these 3 modulation ins. So what these allow you to do is basically modulate this cutoff frequency. So remember, the most important thing about modular synthesis is creating movement. And there's so many different ways to do that. And there's so many different tools that let you do that. For example, an LFO, which is basically just a very, very slow oscillator. So for example, if I go to this LFO over here, and I grab the sine wave, and I now use it to modulate the filter frequency, you can now hear that movement is being handled. And the speed of that is controlled by the frequency of the LFO. So that would be kind of a really basic setup. These kind of things you would find in almost any synthesizer. So the idea is that you use modules to create movement in other modules. So the basis for modulation is you need 3 things. You need a source, so something that provides the modulation, which would be, in this case, the LFO. You then need a target, which in this case is the frequency on the low-pass filter. And then the last thing is just amount, so how much modulation you're actually applying. And you can see here above the little modulation inputs, you can basically set the strength of the modulation. So if I just wanted a very gentle bit of movement, so, and you can see as I increase that, you can hear how the strength of it basically increases. So that's the kind of basic idea of modulation, is you have these sources that provide the modulation, targets that accept the modulation, and then the amounts, basically. So those are kind of like the 3 basic ingredients. Okay, so what we're going to design today is some kind of sort of drum or percussive sequence. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually get rid of this low-pass filter, and I'm going to replace it with something called a bode shifter. And this is basically just a frequency shifter, so it allows you to sort of take the frequencies of the incoming signal, so the oscillator creating the sounds, and it allows you to basically shift those by sort of equal amounts. So you get like quite an interesting sort of tone. So let's take, again, the output from my little mixer into the bode shifter, and then I'm going to want to filter that as well afterwards. So I'm going to take the output from the bode shifter and connect it to the in. It's kind of like, it's sort of just like, I don't know if you were a kid, if you ever had
Join the dots.
Join the dots. It's kind of
it's exactly what I was
exactly
thinking.
kind of the same thing. And the great thing about this is obviously having an understanding of modular synthesis will make quite a big difference. But even if you don't know what's happening, there's a very simple sort of system that they've built here. So you've got modulation amounts, which you control above sort of each modulation input, right? But if you're not sure where something's supposed to go, if you click on an input, like say for example now, I want to take the output of this low-pass filter and now attach it to our VCA so we can hear it, right? If I grab this output, can you see how some of the inputs have now turned red?
Yeah.
So what this is telling you is that the connection that you've grabbed, these all can accept that connection.
Oh, amazing.
So it actually simplifies it. So you're not plugging, the output of a filter into the input of an LFO by mistake.
That's brilliant.
So the way that they've done it is actually very clever. It allows you to sort of see what is acceptable. So once you have a basic sound, and we'll spend a bit of time kind of getting the sound right. And then a bit later we'll look at some experimentation. So try things that I have no idea what they're going to do. But
that'll be fun.
Well, fun or scary. Which actually brings me to one thing quickly. I'm running this through Ableton Live, and I've put a glue compressor after the Modular V, and I've enabled soft clip, which basically turns it into a limiter. So it just saturates any loud output. The reason for this is because the synth can make really loud noises sometimes.
Oh, okay, yeah,
so,
you mentioned this earlier.
Yeah, so it's important to have like a safety. So you could use just a normal limiter. I prefer the sound of the glue compressor in Ableton, so that's why I basically set that up.
Okay.
So that just means that if it peaks over a certain point, it's not going to blow up speakers or headphones or whatever it might be.
Safety first.
Safety first, absolutely, health and safety. Okay, so what we should have now is, so we got that connected there. Let's see, what have I done? I wasn't concentrating. And so that's going to there, that's going to there. And we've lost sound.
Uh-oh.
Hold up. Let's go back to the start. All right. I totally, see, this is the problem with these things as well, is that when you lose your train of thought, you need to kind of like start again. Okay, so again, we'll just start from a blank template. Let's grab that saw wave into the mixer. And then up here, this is going to go into our bowed shifter. So let's first just check that we're getting level out of here. So I'll grab the mix output. That's going to go to our VCA. Cool, so we're getting level that far in. Ah, I see what was wrong. I think the cutoff on the filter was all the way down. So now I'm going to grab the output from here, connect it to the input on the low pass filter, and then finally that is going to go to the VCA. So now, if I bring this up, we've got sound. Okay, so we're making a percussion sound, right? So what we're going to get to next is the sequencer. And this is probably one of the reasons why Moog synthesizers were so sought after, is this sequencer is quite an incredible little thing. So as we know, sequencers basically allow us to sort of sequence particular patterns and beats and hits. So we can kind of trigger them in one way and then they go and sort of do their own thing. So you can use the sequencer to basically trigger the sound. At the moment, the sound's triggered by the keyboard. But if I go over to my VCA here and click on this little input, I can see it's basically set to keyboard trigger on. But what I can do is I can change that to sequencer trigger. So now what's going to happen is when I hold the key, it's going to trigger the sequencer playback. All I need to do is get the speed to the right level. So it's basically just creating a sequence for us, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so the on and off of the sequencer is still controlled by the keyboard. But again, you can kind of like change those here. You can set them to, I mean, this should give you some idea of like how crazy this thing can be. You can set oscillators to trigger like on and off messages to the sequencer. Like the stuff happening behind the scenes can get quite insane. But for the moment, it makes more sense to just have the keyboard basically triggering on and off. All right, so let's, before we get too detailed on the sound, let's have a look at what we can do with the actual sequencer itself. So as you can see, it's an 8-step sequencer, and you can run it in a number of different ways because it has these 3 rows. And if I set this to sequencer 1 over here, so what I'm now doing is I'm telling the oscillator that to get its pitch from this sequencer here.
Okay.
So now, what will happen if I start changing these dials? So you can start creating like little melodic sequences.
Cool.
So that's one way to kind of just really quick and easily create little sequences. And again, all you have to do is basically just set this little setting at below the driver section of the oscillator. Just set that to sequencer 1. Basically, that's the first row.
Okay.
But we're going to take that off now because, like I said, we're going to make a percussion sound. So, and you can see now these no longer affect the tuning. So, there's a couple of different things you can do to change the beat. So you've got these little link buttons, and what they let you do is they let you link different steps together, so you can have slightly longer steps. So, for example, you could do something like this. You could have So what it's doing is it's basically the note length is the same, but it's
Yeah.
not triggering twice. It's
Oh,
only
okay.
so it's linking those two together into one longer note, basically. What you can also do is you can create repeats. So if we push these repeats up a little bit here, so let's put that up to there. Let's maybe push these up to there. So what this is doing is it's changing the number of beats in between steps. And if you want to hear what those beats sound like, you can actually just engage these little repeat buttons. So you can start creating like really complex patterns just from this seemingly simple 8-step sequencer. You can kind of make all these really interesting little sort of like little steps. And then you can also set it to go backwards and forwards. So again, I'm holding one note and you get all this movement out of it, right? Okay, so let's start shaping our sound a bit more. So I'm going to use the bode shifter to start changing the tone of it.
Yeah.
I'm going to push the scale up to 500, which is basically the scale of the frequency cycle, so how fast the frequencies are moving. Okay, so let's get that kind of into the right place, let's get it to the right level. So also what I'm going to do in my envelope, because it's a percussive sound, percussion sounds don't have any sustain. So if you think about, you know, the difference between sort of playing a violin where you can kind of maintain the sustain for as long as you want, to hitting a snare drum, where it's literally, you know, the sound starts and then kind of dissipates immediately. So when you're creating percussive sounds, it's good to kind of set your sustain to 0.
Okay.
And you really just want that really short, just a little, just like a small sound, right? Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to start creating a bit of movement in the filter. So one of the cool things about this is that so I kind of showed you earlier where you could use an LFO to change the shape of the frequency in the filter. So you can use that LFO to kind of get it to move. What's really cool about this is you can actually use the step sequencer to also get things to move.
Okay.
So so all these knobs really represent is a value. So here is basically the least amount of value, and then that's the maximum amount of value. So if you start creating sort of interesting shapes, again, I'm just going to do this and see what it sounds like. It's always a bit of an experiment. So let's maybe set it to that. And then this is sequencer row 2 or sequencer column 2. So in this middle bar between the mixer and the sequencer, I can actually just grab this, which is sequencer column 2.
Okay.
And I can use that to modulate one of my modulators. So whether it's the filter or the bode shifter. So let's try it on the filter first. So you can hear it's now opening and closing according to those steps. So we're starting to actually get like a little bit more movement, a bit of life into it. And you can affect that by how much amount you're using as well.
Right.
And that's all controlled by these steps here. So if I wanted to kind of like, say, open up in the middle here and then kind of slowly get more closed towards the end.
You could just get lost for days playing.
You really can, yeah. Just kind of getting the basics is it's quite fun. But like when you have like your main sound, the interesting stuff starts to happen when you kind of experiment from that point. Okay, so we can also use, and this is the one thing that the software can do that the hardware can't, is that you can have multiple outputs coming from an output. So you know you couldn't necessarily do that with the real thing because it's only one sort of input. So I can use the same thing to modulate, say, the bode shifter as well.
Right. Okay.
Starting to kind of do something a little bit more interesting now because the movement's all locked to tempo as well. Okay, so let's see how we can kind of get a bit more interesting movement as well. Firstly, let's add some noise, because when you're creating percussion sounds, especially with a synthesizer, white noise is very important. If you listen to, kind of any of those old school like 808s, or listen to like early Kraftwerk when they were using synthesizers to create beat sounds, all of those kind of hi-hat and snare sounds, it's mainly white noise. It's
Really?
it's just
Just on its own?
well, pure noise that's kind of been like cut and sort of filtered. But the signal is just pure noise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab, there's our little noise generator at the top here. I'm going to grab the output from there and connect that into our mixing desk.
Okay.
And what I can do, because I've already got an output going here that's going through my chain, I can just link these two outputs together.
Okay.
So it just means that any inputs that are linked will all come out of the first output.
Okay.
So you can now hear the noise in there. It's just got that little bit of... And I can control the sort of loudness of the noise here with this little sort of volume control in the mixer. So slowly starting to kind of turn into something. Okay, so let's take the randomness idea a little bit further as well. So what you can do, by the way, you can change all these modules however you want, just by clicking on their title, and you'll see what other modules that are similar are available to you, basically, like in that space. For filters, for example, we'll have a look at it in a moment, but there's a bunch of different ones: high pass, low pass, multi-mode. So you can kind of flip through them. It's almost like to be able to buy a modular that actually had all these things included would just be an astronomical amount of money to do. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a little module called sample and hold. And basically what this does is it takes a little bit of the signal, and it does exactly what it says on the box. It samples it, and then it holds it in place.
Okay.
So noise is basically just random volume at random frequencies, like over the entire frequency spectrum. So if I wanted to add some randomization, noise is going to be the best thing to use, because it's already, just by its nature, random.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a little bit of noise with the sample and hold, and then I'm going to take the output from that, and I'm going to connect that. So can you hear how now it's created like all this sort of noise it's got a much more sort of movement in it.
Much more, yeah.
And you can do things like, if I just switch the trigger off over here, and kind of bring the glide down so it's a little bit more sort of steppy.
Great.
That's my main door. Again, something that in the original would have been quite difficult to do. So let's just find a tempo. And then what I can do is MIDI sync the delay as well. And over here, you basically tell it which VCAs you want to run through the delay. So at the moment, we're only using VCA1, which is this guy up here. So we'll activate VCA1 there. And then let's see if we can find some interesting sort of timings. So can you hear that stereo now is really interesting. So it's basically like pure left. So you get these really nice kind of like counter rhythms.
Sounds like there's a swarm of killer bees in here.
Pretty much. They're after us. Can just bring that down a little bit just so the filter doesn't open up too much. So let's maybe create a second sort of signal chain for our second VCA as well.
Okay.
So at the moment, I can obviously just keep adding things to the sort of first input chain that I've got, but it'd be nice to actually start using some of the other bits as well. So, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start over here, and I think what I'm going to start with is just grabbing some more white noise. So we'll grab this white noise, plug it into this little driver input over here. And then I'll grab that output and put it into our one remaining filter at the top here. And I'm going to switch this from a low pass to a high pass filter. So what I want to be able to do is filter out the kind of mid frequencies of the noise and then just get like really high, basically aiming for sort of more hi-hatty kind of sound with this. So we'll bring that in there and then we'll connect this to VCA2. So this is our second main output now. Really important here is to then set the trigger for the VCA. So if I turn the volume down on the first one, obviously we've lost all sound. So I'm going to set the trigger input on VCA1 to sequence the trigger, and then I'm going to slowly bring the volume up. And you can see we're getting that little pip sort of sound. We can increase the size of that with the decay.
It does sound like a hi-hat.
Yeah. Basically a hi-hat.
Yeah.
And then we can increase the sort of the tail of it with get like an open closed hi-hat. Okay, so now that we've got this set up, let's again create a little bit of movement in what's going here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the third row of the step sequencer, and I'm just going to make them polar opposites. So minimum, maximum values the whole way through, just so we can kind of hear what it's doing. So we set that up there, and then I grab that information from sequencer column 3. So just grab it out of there, and now I'm going to use. So you can hear it's now got that sort of differentiation between the tone. Push the volume of it a bit, and let's bring the other sounds back in. Kind of also like a song on its own, you know,
it's
quite
like
sort of like dark,
thing.
Dark experimental song. We can also add the VCA2 to the delay as well, so we get that hi-hat sound sort of delaying. Just get these like really nice sort of counter rhythms. Really like the sound of it. What you can also do with the filter bank is you can kind of shape that sound a little bit further. So if I wanted to shape the hi-hat sound a bit more, I'm going to activate it on the filter bank here, and then use these filters to basically get the sound that I'm looking for. So you can hear you can add like more tonality because you can sort of push it at different frequencies. So these are all sort of different frequency bands like you'd find on a multi-band EQ, and you basically have all of those there. So I guess now really comes the point where you start thinking about experimentation. And again, like I said, all you have to do is grab anything really and start seeing what you can do with it. So for example, I can take, let's say this oscillator 9 at the end here. We can grab a saw wave out of there. Sorry, I think that is the saw wave. And let's add that to modulate our bowed shifter, for example. And let's, again, I have no idea what this is going to do. Kind of just adding a little bit of distortion to the sound overall. Let's see what else we can do here. We could use a little bit of that maybe. Let's grab that same saw wave. Let's use it on our low pass filter as well. So what it's doing is it's moving the low pass filter at a very fast rate. So you're getting this kind of distorted sound, and you can increase its frequency. You see how it almost like takes on like a note quality to it now? Here as well. Suddenly it's like in tune, you know what I mean? It's really just a matter of just playing around with it. So that's definitely, if someone's trying this out for the first time, that's something I would really sort of encourage, is just try things and just sort of like see what happens. Part of the joy of modular synthesis is that it literally just is, the sound is sort of created as you go. Obviously, there are certain synthesizers that if you have a specific sound in mind, might be better suited to that sort of task. If you have like a specific bass sound you want, or this really is just this is about exploring the unknown.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like really where the fun comes into it. And also once you've kind of built your sound, it's really quick and easy to sort of map everything as well.
Okay. How
So,
do we do that then?
for example, if I wanted to basically map some of my controllers,
Yeah.
all I have to do is just click on the little MIDI button on the top right here. And then it's literally just a matter of clicking on the control that you want to control, and then just turning the knob you want to assign it to.
That's it.
Yeah, and you can just kind of keep these open, sort of assign the ones you want. So let's maybe assign some of these releases down here as well, because those can be quite interesting for the sound. We can assign the sort of frequency on the bode shifter. So let's just put it there. Before we close this up, let's assign the wet control on the delay as well, so we can kind of bring that in and out.
Okay.
So we have that there. Okay. So now, you can hear those are really open now. So let's close that up. So I can now kind of create all that movement just using my controls here. I just gotta always keep playing with it. Yeah, so I don't know if we're getting any questions.
Yeah, we are. So a question here was wondering why the driver's pulse width knob was changed from the original 10 to 90% to 0 to 50. Seems to be an unusual and limiting change for what is otherwise a great synth.
That is a great question. I actually don't have an answer for
that.
We'll have to Google that, or maybe ask someone at Arturia. I'm not 100% familiar with the earlier versions. So for me, this was the version I kind of got into it with. So I didn't, unfortunately, notice the change.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid I'm not sure about that.
Cool, no worries. Ashcombe says, is the VST the same with analog gear?
Is the VST the same with analog gear? I'm guessing that's a question about does it sound the same as the analog gear? I would say it's very close. I don't have one, but I've had the pleasure of sort of using a real Moog Series 55.
Have you?
Yeah, and I've seen some incredible performances. You get guys like Keiji Hayano, who's this sort of experimental noise artist who basically uses one, and this is a really faithful recreation. That's something I've always admired about Arturia's software, is that it sounds great. I mean, it looks great. It's fun to use, and it sounds really good. There's so many different sort of shaping options that you can get almost more sounds out of this than you probably could out of the original.
Yeah. And what about, does it come with presets?
It does. It comes with a sort of a massive library of presets.
Really?
So, and of course, it's quite easy for you to sort of create your own presets as well. They're all kind of filtered by type. So, for example, we're looking for sequences. There's sort of a whole bunch sort of built in here. We can check out one of the sort of built-in sequences as well. That's still mine, I think. Wait a minute. I know that sound.
What's this one?
This one's called 4 a.m.
Oh.
And you'll see a lot of them will be pre-assigned to control this.
Oh, okay.
So that's quite a crazy one. It's sort of, got quite like an atonal kind of feel to it. But yeah, the library is packed with loads and loads of different sounds.
Nice.
So yeah, I mean, this thing really is just, it's a little box of joy for me. Just in terms of being able to really, I love, one of the things I do with this is I usually map my outputs. So I record MIDI when I'm sort of using it in Ableton, but I map the outputs to an audio channel.
Right.
And while I'm kind of sitting there putting my sounds together and just playing around, I record all that audio as well.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And you know, 99% of it is just kind of like messy, like jumbly little
Yeah.
bits. But every now and again, it's like, oh, that was actually really good.
Moments of genius.
Well, just little. You might find like little loops that really work quite
Yeah.
nicely. And the thing with building the synth is you might have moved on from there in terms of the actual setup. So it's quite nice to kind of just keep that as audio.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times that's kind of what they would do with these synths. You know, you think about all the bands that have used this over the years, like Wendy Carlos and
Yes. What was
know,
that album called?
something with Beethoven.
Yeah, it was a whole album.
Yeah, I can't remember what it's called, but it's.
Yeah, it was Bach pieces played on the Moog.
Yes. Yeah, that was it.
Bit of history there for you.
Bit of synth history. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for that overview. That was,
Absolute pleasure.
I mean, I found it really informative. And it kind of, was, when you started explaining it, it was really like quite logical, you know?
It really is. And I know it's like for a lot of people, like you look at something like this and it is just, it's, you know, what is going on here.
When it gets a bit crazy, you can just think back to that join the dots thing.
Yeah, literally that you know, again, you can get a sound with just one connection.
Yeah.
And part of the fun of these kind of things is the exploration. It's the not knowing, because then you do silly things that people who actually know what they might be doing, you know, wouldn't necessarily do. A lot of the best sounds I've come up with have been just by pure accidents, just sort of playing around. And this definitely allows for that, because I think it's almost too complicated to be able to completely understand and predict what it's going to do.
Yeah.
And that's part of the beauty of it, really.
Cool. Well, thank you very much.
It was an absolute pleasure.
Cool. Well, I hope that you guys found that inspiring. And if you would like to find out a little bit more about DJing, music production, sound engineering, or radio, just head to pointblankmusicschool.com, where you can check out a whole range of our courses. We'll be back very soon with another Friday Forum Live. Have a lovely weekend.